Barack Obama has to find time to start engaging with perhaps the trickiest short-term problem on America's foreign policy agenda, Iran. President Obama is moving tentatively to open up serious dialogue with Iran, but that process could be a long, slow one. And if further evidence emerges that Iran is moving closer to nuclear weapons capacity, he would come under heavy pressure to act preemptively. But Robert Baer, a decorated former veteran CIA agent described by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh as the agency's best agent in the Middle East, is suggesting a radically different prescription. Baer is best known to the wider world as portrayed by George Clooney in the film Syriana. The movie was loosely based on Baer's memoir. But in his latest book, The Devil We Know, Baer argues that America has Iran wrong. That a long-term détente has to be negotiated that recognises the reality of Iran's dominance in the Middle East. He says the alternative is an unaffordable 30-year war. Robert Baer arrived in Australia today for the Perth Writers' Festival, and I spoke with him in Sydney. Robert Baer, you argue that Iran is embarked on an agenda of empire building, that by use of proxies it's already halfway there. We'll get to its ultimate goal of empire shortly, but how do you define the parts of empire that Iran already controls?
I would define, and I'd come very down strongly on this, Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, is an Iranian proxy. We have certainly seen evidence that he's told the Iranians over the years that he will do nothing, take no action, without clearing it with Tehran. This is very clear. The intelligence was, and this goes back to 1982. He is a proxy. He is a surrogate. Call him anything you want. He is an Iranian general, if you like. He has the equivalent of that status in Iran. He answers to Tehran. Hezbollah is not an independent force in any sense of the word. You have large parts of Hamas answer to Tehran. There are arguments in intelligence circles that Hamas has stopped suicide bombings in order to revert to rocket attacks on Iranian orders. You see Iran and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. You see large parts of Iraq, the Shia parties in particular, answer to Tehran.
You say America really only has the choice of starting another 30-year war with Iran or negotiating some kind of détente in which America essentially does withdraw from the region. What's wrong with an ongoing policy of containment of Iran?
It's utterly failed, because what's happened is that the United States looks at the Middle East through Israel, and the Arabs and the Persians look at Israel as an outpost of the United States, of the West. We've lost this anti-colonial game, and the Iranians have won it. They've simply portrayed themselves as not as religious fanatics, but as an anti-colonial power. And everybody in the Middle East, you look at the polls across the board, even countries like Morocco, which are entirely Sunni, look to Tehran as the great anti-imperial power. We've lost the ideological war. That doesn't mean we've lost the war entirely, but we've lost the ideological war. But by bringing Iran to the negotiating table, by implementing Resolution 242, closing the settlements in the West Bank, getting the Israelis to a position where they don't have to feel they have to bomb Gaza, will normalize relations in the Middle East.
When you paint Iran almost as a kind of reasonable nation with which America can negotiate, how do you reconcile that with the image that President Ahmadinejad portrays?
Well, I mean, most recently he said he said he'll talk to Obama. He said he wants to talk to him, and this is a great opening which we should take advantage of. But we have to look at that Iran, what we miss is that Iran is not run by the mullahs. It is a military dictatorship. Khamenei, the supreme leader, controls the military. He controls the intelligence service. He controls the prosecutors, police force. He's not even really an Ayatollah. He does not have the qualifications. Yet he runs the army. He is the man we need to talk to. It's a military dictatorship. And any military conflict can be negotiated. Ideological ones cannot be.
Are you saying Ahmadinejad is irrelevant?
He's relevant to the economy. He controls a lot of ministries, but he does not control the power ministries. If there's a meeting of the Iranian National Security Council, often he will not be invited.
And in the meantime, while these negotiations are going on, what does America do about Iran's interest in nuclear weapons?
the nuclear weapons is a red herring in this conflict with Iran, because the Iranians are not going to build a bomb now. I'm almost convinced of it. Inasmuch as you can predict anything, they're not going to build and test a bomb now. It causes them too many problems. They've gained too much. There would be international embargo, sanctions, and on and on. Even Russia and China would back away. A nuclear bomb, they don't need one right now. It's just a way to get us to the negotiating table. But the major point is they're not going to commit suicide. If the Iranians wanted to commit suicide, they could have done it long ago in the Gulf, started a war with the United States. And they're not going to start one with Israel either.
On a personal note, given that the movie Syriana is based loosely on your memoir, how closely was it based on reality?
Fairly closely. I mean, it's based on, there's a story about a prince that was aware of 9/11 that I used to meet. He was kidnapped, brought back to the Gulf. There is a certain amount of, I mean, there's financial corruption in Washington. I mean, everywhere you go. I think we've seen that in Iraq with $120 billion, which have disappeared of aid money. Money buys votes in Washington. And that was really what the movie is about.
You've described being in the CIA as fun. Is that what it really was for you, fun?
Oh, it was an absolute adventure. I loved it. If it hadn't become so routine, I would have stayed in.
And what about the CIA of today, the CIA of rendition of waterboarding, of other forms of torture?
That's just a scandal. That's an utter scandal of torture.
Didn't happen in your time, any of that? No.
I mean, we knew we were always aware of torture going on in the Middle East and South America, places like that, because we saw reports. And it's, what we understood was that torture is a form of political intimidation. It was never a way to get good information. The intelligence services in the Middle East that got good information did it by classical methods, police methods, normal interrogations. Torture never works. It's a scandal, and I have yet to see one case based on torture that's made a case. You know, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind. Don't we all forget that he confessed Al Jazeera before he was ever captured? I mean, he said, I did it. And since then, he said nothing much. I mean, it's a total waste of time. It's a huge, I just am embarrassed the United States even engaged in, and I think there should be trials.
Do you respect the quality of America's intelligence today? Any different under Obama, do you think it will be?
I think it's going to be better. I mean, I support the Panetta appointment as CIA director. Blair is going to be fairly good. I think that Obama is up against a culture of dishonesty, which he's got to break down piece by piece, but he certainly sounds like he's going to do it. And they're going to have to do the same thing in the CIA because it became, during the Bush years, a culture of total dishonesty.
So ultimately, on the Middle East, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Pessimist. If I were at the Pentagon taking the vote, whether it would be a war, I just think that a couple rockets are going to come out of Gaza or Lebanon. In the Middle East, you always sound intelligent if you predict the worst, because you're usually right. So I try to sound intelligent.
Not a good note to end the interview on, but that's where it is. Robert Baer, thanks very much for talking with us.